Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Wednesday. This is Seattle Now. If you've been on Seattle dating apps, you may have come across the letters ENM. That stands for ethical non-monogamy, also known as polyamory, an increasingly common relationship type involving multiple partners. As ethical non-monogamy gains more recognition across the U.S., Seattle could be the next city to weigh polyamorous people as a protected class. New York Times Pacific Northwest Bureau Chief Anna Griffin will tell us more in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. REI employees are speaking out today about their efforts to reach a contract agreement with the company. Workers at 11 stores voted to unionize in 2022. Last month, 99% of members voted down a contract proposal from the company. In previous statements, REI has said it is committed to working toward a collective bargaining agreement. Union members plan to hold a press conference this morning in front of Seattle's REI flagship store. Families of students who attended a now-closed private school are accusing state and local officials of enabling child abuse. The Northwest School of Innovative Learning taught students with disabilities at locations in Redmond, Tacoma, and Tumwater. It shut down 2 years ago amid allegations of excessive use of restraint and isolation. The Tacoma News Tribune reports 5 separate lawsuits take aim at Washington's education department and several school districts. The plaintiffs say the state was aware of the school's problems for years, but failed to take action. And Bellevue College today is announcing a permanent rededication of a campus mural. Never Again Is Now depicts the incarceration of 2 Japanese-American children during World War II. 6 years ago, a section of the artist's description was defaced by a Bellevue College vice president who later resigned. We'll bring more about this story on Seattle Now next week and talk with the mural's artist, Aaron Shigaki. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now.
I made the assumption when I moved to Oregon from Texas that dating as a queer person would be easier. Oh, lordy, was I wrong. Because now everyone is either part of the greater Seattle area polycule, or their profile says, let's go on a hike.
Polyamory has found a home in the Pacific Northwest. More than a third of Seattle area OkCupid users said they're open to polyamory and non-monogamy, according to an Axios Seattle story from 2024. But advocates for polyamory say the subject is still a taboo and can lead to discrimination. So they're turning to local legislatures for help.
Living here in Seattle, one of my partners ran into some discrimination at work that got me involved in this personally.
That's Jessa Davis, the executive director of the Seattle Coalition for Family and Relationship Equity, or CFRE. She's polyamorous and describes herself as a relationship anarchist.
Relationship anarchy is about living your life in relationship with people in a way that doesn't follow a specific script, right? Various spectrums that say, what does this relationship look like and how do I show up for this person? What works for us?
Jessa lives with a group of friends she calls her chosen family, none of which are her romantic partners. She says these kinds of life choices put her and others at risk of discrimination.
Losing your job or being denied housing because you have multiple partners or date multiple people who don't live with you or whatever it might be. When people allow their personal prejudices and their idea of what a family should look like, deny people access to the material conditions they need to live, that's ultimately what this is about.
Jessa says CFRE is working on getting a bill passed in Seattle similar to ones passed in cities in Massachusetts, California, and Oregon that offer housing and employment protections for people from non-conventional family or relationship structures. And about 2 weeks ago, Olympia became the first city in Washington to pass similar protections. This includes polyamorous people, but casts a wider net, like people living with friends or multi-generational households. Seattle is another city where advocates think they can make inroads with a proposal endorsed by the Seattle Human Rights Coalition, LGBTQ Coalition, and Renters Coalition. New York Times Pacific Northwest Bureau Chief Anna Griffin spoke to advocates and detractors of polyamory. She's here to tell us what she found. Anna, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about polyamory here in the PNW. There are running jokes about the greater Seattle polycule. What makes the region such a hotbed for polyamory?
This is a region that is always sort of on the cutting edge of cultural change. It is a region that people are kind of here by choice, right? It's hard to stumble into this corner of the United States. And I think that gives us sort of a freedom to live life our own way. This is also still, in some ways, the frontier, right? There's a sort of get along, do what you want, live your own life, don't tell me how to live mine ethos, I think, in the Pacific Northwest.
What did you hear from advocates about what makes this lifestyle such a draw?
There are lots of different ways to love. There are lots of different forms of family. I think particularly millennials and Gen Z, I think of them as kids. They don't call themselves kids, but I'm old. They look at life and I think they want to live in a different way than their parents did. They feel a lot more fluid about relationships, and the concept of a chosen family, I think, is very popular now and very common. And I think more and more people are kind of rethinking the structure of their lives and looking for something that fits them, not necessarily what they were taught was the sign of success as they grew up.
I want to hear more a little bit about the evolution of thought around this, Anna Griffin. What did you learn?
What is interesting is that all of these ordinances that we're talking about that would add protections for family structure, the size and scope and shape of your household, grow out of efforts to increase protections for queer people. And there is a real push from people who are living non-monogamously to consider themselves part of the queer community. So in Olympia, for example, last year, they expanded their sanctuary policies to include the LGBTQ plus community. People in the polyamory community came to them and said, what about us? Please include us. In Portland, down in Oregon, where I am, the city council has done a lot to protect immigrants, a lot to protect gays and lesbians and bisexual people. This year, there's been a push with the Trump administration doing what it's doing to add protections for members of the transgender community. And that is where this question of family structure protections, that's where it came up in Portland. So there is, on the one hand, a group of advocates for non-monogamy and polyamorous families sort of tying themselves onto efforts to increase protections for people living all sorts of, I'm using air quotes here, non-traditional lives.
Yeah, let's clear this up for some of the unks in the room here. Let's talk about the difference between these lifestyles that we're talking about. Polyamory doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a physical relationship. Is that true?
Right. I mean, I think it's like a lot of things. I mean, we use queer as a blanket term for so many things now. And I think, the organization that's pushing a lot of these policies is OPEN, and that is an acronym for the Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy. So there are different things. There are polycules, groups of people may or may not be romantically tied together, living together, or if not living together, then at least sort of forming a sort of chosen family. There are plenty of people, if you go on Tinder today or Field or any of them, you'll see plenty of people who are practicing ethical non-monogamy. They are in romantic relationships. They are not tying themselves down to one person. Part of what this movement is doing is trying to put some of this in writing, declaratively say these are reasonable, legal, protected lifestyle choices.
And of course, none of this is like polygamy, which is very different than what we're talking about.
Yeah, these are not efforts to expand the legal definition of marriage to include more than two people. There's a lot of legal precedent out there that renders that conversation moot.
You spoke to a lot of activists who say they can't be honest about their relationships for fear of discrimination in places like the workplace. What does that look like for people?
It means a lot. I am a middle-aged lesbian. It means a lot of what I dealt with early in my life. Being in social settings, being in workplace settings, and not being able to be fully honest about your life. There was a couple, two members of a three-person household in Portland who testified before the city council, two men and a woman, own a home, raise children together. And what they said is they moved to the Northwest from Colorado because in Colorado, they could not be out about their lifestyle at all. In the Pacific Northwest, they are a little bit more comfortable, but they would love legal protections to back that up so that a random thing that you say at the water cooler doesn't turn into you losing your job or not getting promotion or feeling in some way impacted professionally by just being honest about what your family structure is.
What did you hear from people you interviewed about why these protections, these anti-discrimination protections, are important right now?
I heard a lot of anecdotal evidence that in addition to just not being comfortable being open about their lives, that people who are living either dating non-monogamously, living polyamorously, that there is a real fear that they are being denied an apartment that you're applying for, denied a promotion that you're applying for, because of a sense of, for lack of a better term, like sort of an, ooh, that's weird factor, right? That a coworker hears you talking about the two people you're dating, and that is used against you at some point in the future. I will be honest with you, I didn't hear a lot of practical, here's how you prove it. And I think what's going to be interesting about these ordinances is seeing if people do come forward, and we do see cases of discrimination investigated and proven. A lot of this is very early days for this kind of policy, for this kind of topic. It's much easier when you're talking gender discrimination, racial discrimination, to prove it. We know what that looks like. We've had a generation of laws on the books, and this is very much new ground that's being tread.
We're living in a time where protections for queer people are being rolled back. Is this something conservatives are thinking about? Where does this fit in with the larger culture war narrative?
I think this is front and center. Down here in Portland, there were more moderate, it's Portland, so there are no moderates, but there were more sort of left of center rather than far left city council members who were very concerned about putting in writing in this ordinance polyamory, because they were very concerned the Trump administration would find out, the far right would find out, and that would just reignite focus on communities in the Pacific Northwest. I talked to a researcher with the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank in DC, who was part of the first Trump administration in rolling back a lot of what we think of as civil rights protections, was an architect of Project 2025. And he sees this as very much the next front in the culture war, that not just retrenching on gay rights and non-discrimination ordinances on gender and race and gender orientation, but they see this as part of threats to traditional marriage, that this is all about, from their point of view, making things acceptable as a way to undermine the nuclear family. And that we hear that this is about dissolving traditional cisgender male-female marriage from the right on just about all of these topics right now. But I think this one in particular terrifies the right for that reason.
Advocates here in Seattle are working on getting a similar non-discrimination bill passed. Is this likely?
The Seattle City Council, I don't think they're going to be much more moderate than Olympia or Portland. And I think from the vantage point of progressive legislators on the local level, it seems like common sense. Why wouldn't you put this in writing? Because it's not just about polyamorous households, right? It is also about intergenerational households. It is about friends who have chosen to build lives together, who are not necessarily romantically involved, but form a chosen family. It is about siblings. It is about children caring for grandparents. It is about a single mom with her kid. It's about establishing protection for a much broader range of family structures.
I want to ask you a question about this because I'm intrigued that maybe some of this is about how expensive it is to live and how much of that has changed the ideal of what a household and a relationship and a familiar relationship looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that is part of it. I think it is also a generational shift in how people feel about marriage and about the prospect that you are going to meet one person, and that is the person that you are meant to be with, despite what Love is Blind tells us, right? We know what divorce rates are in this country. We know rates of marriage are going down. We know how particularly Gen Z folks feel about that sort of traditional nuclear family structure. I think it's both a practical, it just doesn't make sense financially, and also existential. How do I want to live? I want to be open to more possibilities.
Really, really fascinating. Where could this movement be headed? Is this legal protection the start of something greater?
Well, we talked a minute ago about fears on the right, that this is about making this normalized and legal, and in some ways going after marriage. And I think to an extent they're right, that the goal, I talk to advocates, goal number one is make it possible for people who are living this way to come out of the closet and be open. That is step one toward adding not just legal protections, but financial protections and more benefits, just as marriage is a legal institution regulated by government. We are not yet at the point where promoters, supporters of polyamorous lifestyles are saying 3 people should be able to get married, 3 people should be able to get benefits. But I don't think it's out of the question that that is eventually where they would like to be.
Really, really fascinating. Anna Griffin is the Pacific Northwest Bureau Chief for the New York Times. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now, and thank you to our generous donors for your financial support. Take a minute to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. Today's episode was produced by Vaughn Jones. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tonight for Evening Headlines.